Oh, we got quite a few. You want to wait just another minute or two, maybe? Looks like we got a fair amount there, Don,
Yep.
but see if anybody else joins us before we kick it off. Yeah. How we get?
All right.
Okay, I guess you can.
Well, that was the share screen they just took down right at 8:30.
Yep.
So,
Well, I guess we could probably go. Yeah.
You all set?
yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Might as well kick it off, Pat.
All right, thanks. Well, first of all, welcome everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's virtual meeting of CSG East Transportation Policy Committee. I know we all wish it were in person, and hopefully next year we get to do this, but still it's great to be able to meet everybody today. There's a lot going on in the transportation world, both on the state and federal level. Today, we have some great speakers who will provide us with an overview of what is happening in Washington, as well as a discussion of the proposal for a national infrastructure bank. Very exciting information there to assist states in funding and financing transportation. We're also going to hear from state and provincial legislative members on activities related in their respective states related to transportation. This will be a roundtable discussion, a format that we have used with great success over the last several years. So now I'd like to introduce a member who is not able to join us today, but Lou DePalma. Senator Lou DePalma will be our new Transportation Committee's Vice Chair. We thank Lou for accepting that role, and I'll give you a brief bio on Lou. Lou is a Democratic member of the Rhode Island Senate representing District 12 since January of 2009. He previously served on the Middletown, Rhode Island Town Council for several years before stepping down to run for the Rhode Island State Senate. Lou's been a very active member of the CSG East Transportation Policy Committee, and in January of this year, he was appointed to serve as Vice Chair. We welcome Lou in his new leadership role, and although he is unable to make it to today's meeting, we know he's here in spirit. And one of the agenda items, the National Infrastructure Bank proposal, was his suggestion. It's been something he's been working on for a long time and been a great proponent of. So next, I'm going to move right along to item number 3, which is a Washington update, federal focus, surface transportation legislation. This is going to be presented in about 10 minutes. It's going to take about 10 minutes and will be presented by Tanya Snyder. I'll give you a brief bio on Tanya. Tanya Snyder serves as covers transportation, for Politico Pro, with special interest in driverless cars, safety issues. Before joining Politico, she was the editor of Streets Blog USA, a daily news source on sustainable transportation and land use. At Streets Blog, she founded and co-hosted the Talking Headways podcast about transportation and urban design. Tanya cut her journalistic teeth in radio, covering Congress for NPR stations, Pacifica Radio, and reporting on everything from statehood snowstorms to the Washington, D.C.'s most listened to radio station. Tanya has lived and worked in Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, but these days stays a lot closer to home at her transit-oriented Washington, D.C. neighborhood. Thank you for joining us, Tanya, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here with you all. I'll be taking questions at the end, or if people have questions throughout, please feel free to just pop in. So I'm just going to give kind of an overview of the process with the bipartisan infrastructure plan in the Senate and as it's going to the House now. If you already know all of this, please feel free to kind of move me along and ask more specific questions. The basics are that the Senate last week passed a bipartisan infrastructure package. It's about $1.2 trillion, about $550 billion of that is new money. And it was I can kind of go through the details of what's in it. There's about $110 billion of new money for roads and bridges, about $39 billion, again, of new money for public transportation, a lot for the power grid, water systems, broadband. As you know, it was a hard fought process to get there. It took many months. It started in March, really, with Biden's plan, the American Jobs Plan. That was really his first priority. I mean, we hear from a lot of presidents and candidates that infrastructure is a top priority, but this really was his first priority out of the gate as soon as the COVID bill was completed. And his jobs plan was $2 trillion. It was and all new money, and significantly more aggressive and ambitious. And so first, a group of Republicans led by Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia started getting together and meeting with the Biden White House to see if they could shape it into something that could get bipartisan consensus. That effort failed. It then turned over to this group of 20 moderate senators, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats in the Senate. And that, there were months of stops and starts and signs that maybe it was falling apart. And in the end, they came up with a deal. And that deal has held together. The Senate passed it by a vote of 69 to 30 last week. And this bill, importantly, has the surface transportation reauthorization inside of it. And it has the Senate proposal from the EPW committee and the Commerce committees inside of it. So this is the surface transportation bill that needs to be reauthorized by September 30th. And spoiler alert, it won't be. So we'll talk about that in a minute. It still has a long road ahead. The House bill was significantly, it was smaller in terms of its scope. The House passed a surface transportation bill and attached some water infrastructure to it, and that passed on July 1st. In the House floor. And that bill would have also, been much more restrictive to state governments. That would have tied the hands of state transportation officials in terms of measuring and reducing carbon emissions, or making sure that state of good repair is addressed before new highways are built, or improving safety metrics. It would have included a lot of requirements for states to meet these performance measures. None of that is in the Senate bill. The Senate bill is provides a lot more flexibility to state DOTs. So where we are now is that Peter DeFazio, who's the chair of the House Transportation Committee, was really fighting with his leadership to move his bill forward. A lot of times when the House and Senate both pass a similar bill, they're then conference. So they negotiate through the differences. And he wanted that to happen with his bill. Instead, House leadership decided to take up the Senate bill as it is. It's a very fragile compromise. They didn't want to get they didn't want to kind of disrupt this very fragile compromise that there was, and, you know, try to put in more democratic priorities that they had no guarantee that would then get through the Senate. So the House is taking up the bill as it stands. Now, this is the very strange process that's happening now, is that right after the Senate took up and passed the infrastructure bill, they also passed this budget resolution, this $3.5 trillion budget resolution. That is not the reconciliation bill, but it's kind of what sets in motion the reconciliation bill. And this, a lot of progressives are saying they will not vote on the bipartisan infrastructure plan until they take up this reconciliation bill. And that has all of the parts of Biden's agenda that did not get included in this bipartisan compromise. So it's a lot of parts of his family American Families Plan, also parts of the jobs plan that involved things like home and community-based healthcare, elder care, childcare, paid leave, pre-K, things like that. All of those things are part of the reconciliation bill that that progressives are saying they will not vote for the bipartisan infrastructure plan unless it is paired with this. Now, we also have a group of centrists that have said they will not vote for the budget resolution unless it's paired with the infrastructure bill. But the budget resolution that just passed the Senate and that the House is about to take up next week only sets in motion a process for creating the reconciliation bill. It is not the reconciliation bill. And that bill could take months to create. Chuck Schumer has set a deadline of September 15th for each of the committees to kind of craft their pieces of it. But that doesn't mean that the whole process is going to be done by September 15th by a long shot. So you have this kind of catch-22 where you have one group saying we're not going to vote for the infrastructure bill without the reconciliation bill, which can't start until we do the budget resolution. And then another group saying we're not going to vote for the budget resolution unless it's paired with the infrastructure bill. Pelosi has dispatched the top guns to get there. That's a smaller group of centrists saying that. It's about 11 people at last count, but that's enough. There's the Democrats have a 3-vote majority, and not a single Republican is going to vote for the budget resolution. So she's playing hardball, and the White House has come out supporting her plan. And she sent a letter last night to Democratic members saying, hey, this is what Biden wants. Let's do this. Let's get this done. This is the right procedure. But it's really unclear. The House comes back on Monday, or comes back early from their August recess on Monday, just for 2 days, I think is the plan, and are planning to pass the budget resolution and a voting rights bill. So, you know, we'll have to see what ends up happening with the politics around that. And then in terms of the reconciliation bill, what's in it for transportation is a little unclear. The budget resolution language is very, very broad. The Biden administration promised Republicans and moderates that he was negotiating that bipartisan deal with, that they would not revisit anything in the reconciliation bill that they had addressed in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So, you know, they wouldn't reach some very delicate compromise and agree to language or policy or funding levels for an issue, only to see it sort of like blown up and doubled or tripled or whatever in the reconciliation bill. So, but at the same time, there were a few items left entirely out of the transportation part, including purchase incentives for electric vehicles, which Biden had sought $100 billion for in his American Jobs Plan. So that is expected to be in the reconciliation bill. And then there was in the budget resolution a $60 billion pot of money for the T&I committee in the House. And this may be, we haven't gotten Peter DeFazio to admit to this, but this may be what has made Peter DeFazio a little bit more amenable to just sort of going along with this plan. I mean, I don't think he had a choice, but going along with this plan of really just scuttling his bill. He now has a $60 billion pot to play with in the T&I committee. And then there's another $35 billion for Function 400, which is generally transportation infrastructure programs. And again, very unclear what that's going to be for. We see a question in the chat. Oh, the status of reinstituting federal earmarks. Yeah, those aren't in the bill. Peter DeFazio is saying that it is a huge priority of his to get them back. There were about 1,500 earmarks, mostly Democratic, but definitely a good percentage of them Republican as well, in the House bill. The Senate bill, the senators had talked about doing earmarks as well. They didn't end up putting them in their bill. And it's, again, if those two bills had been conferenced, it's unclear what would have happened to those earmarks. But, I think that DeFazio is more confident that they would have survived. So he is determined to get them in here. Considering that both of these processes are really controlled by the Senate, and that is of no small amount of disappointment and pain for DeFazio, it is unclear how he would possibly get those earmarks in there. The only thing that I would add is that there are authorizing earmarks and there are appropriations earmarks. This is an authorization of the programs that happens every 5 years. And there were earmarks attached to this for the first time in a long time. There are also earmarks attached to appropriations bills that happen every year. And so that could be a place where some of these earmarks end up. This year's appropriations bills are already underway. I don't see that these particular earmarks would end up on those particular bills for this year, but you would have another shot at it. You're not going to have another shot at an authorization bill for 5 years, but appropriations you would within a year. Any other questions? What happens with the FAST Act reauthorization come the end of September? So again, the FAST Act reauthorization is rolled into this bipartisan infrastructure bill. That you're right, I don't think it's going to pass by, considering that reconciliation needs to happen. Reconciliation needs to be finished in the Senate before the House will take up the infrastructure bill. I don't think that there's a chance that that's going to happen before September 30th, when the current authorization of federal surface transportation programs expires. They have done lots of extensions in the past. That is an easy and quick thing that they can do. Nobody wanted to do it. They have put a lot of muscle into getting this done. They started well before the deadline. Everyone will be disappointed to see an extension. If it's 30 days or 60 days, and then they can get something, a real historic investment through, I think that for them, it'll be worth it. Other questions?
Don, how are we doing on time?
We're doing good. I have a question.
Okay.
So the Democrats and the Republicans on the infrastructure bill have been bipartisan, let's say, to a certain extent. Does that, how do you see that bipartisanship continuing into next year in light of the 2022 congressional elections?
People often point to bipartisanship on infrastructure as that infrastructure is sort of the one place where increasingly polarized parties can still come together. Infrastructure is a highly polarizing issue. There's still a lot that Democrats and Republicans fight over. They fight over highways versus transit. They fight over spending levels. They fight over what is really infrastructure. There's plenty to fight about, but in the end, they managed to come up with a bipartisan bill, and they did it again. I wouldn't expect that to necessarily carry over to other issues. Washington is so unbelievably polarized. And, at the same time, they're going to vote on, right now the House is coming back. They're not coming back to vote on this bipartisan infrastructure bill. They're coming back to vote on voting rights legislation and a budget resolution that will get 0 Republican votes. So again, I wouldn't make too much of this bipartisan moment.
Thank you. Unless there's any other questions? I don't see any. Okay, Pat.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tanya. That was great. We're going to move on to our next presentation and discussion of the National Infrastructure Bank proposal. And that will be given by Alphecca Muttardy, who is a macroeconomist, former senior economist for the International Monetary Fund. Ms. Muttardy, as I said, is a macroeconomist with 25 years of experience at the International Monetary Fund. There, she worked on economic and policy programs for numerous countries that form the basis for those countries' requests for financial stabilization loans from the IMF, and in some cases, sovereign debt forgiveness from international lenders. Country assessments involved looking at factors underlying economic growth, poverty levels, the federal budget, money and banking, and trade, especially in primary commodities. Since retirement, Ms. Muttardy has volunteered as macroeconomist and board member of the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank and lead economist for our Revolution Northern Virginia Economy Working Group, and that is a mouthful. To date, she has analyzed developments in the U.S. economy, especially the rise in income and wealth inequality, job losses during the COVID pandemic, racial disparities, and the takeover of Main Street by Wall Street, and lobbied for federal legislation to address them. Some of those legislative issues include H.R. 6422 and the restoration of the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act. Welcome, Alphecca. It's you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to meet all of you today. I do have a slide presentation to explain the National Infrastructure Bank concept. What I'm here today to talk to you about is a bill in Congress, H.R. 3339, which is the follow-on legislation to 6422. It was introduced just on May 20th by Representative Dana Davis from Illinois. Since then, it has a couple of Democratic co-sponsors. We're really looking for Republican co-sponsors to this bill as well. We think it's a really good fit to solve the dilemma of the infrastructure quagmire that we're in and the polarization that was just talked about by the previous speaker in Congress. This bill would create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. And the reason we need such a bank and the reason we are so polarized is we simply haven't got enough money in our federal budget, nor in state and local budgets, since many of you are representatives, know that as well, to cover all of our infrastructure needs. And I'll go over the funding gap in just a minute. This idea of a public bank to finance infrastructure is not a new idea. We've had 4 such very large banks in our nation's past, going all the way back to the American Revolutionary War, when Treasurer Secretary Alexander Hamilton and President George Washington configured the first Bank of the United States. It lent into projects like roads, bridges, canals, and our first industrial centers that actually started our industrial revolution. We had a second bank under 2 presidents, John Quincy Adams and Madison started it. And that built transportation systems, in particular, the whole canal system that was used before we even had roads. That was our transportation, main transportation, and rail as well. Abraham Lincoln started a 3rd set of banks, built things like the Transcontinental Railroad, and then a 4th really large institution called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. almost everybody knows about the New Deal, but they don't know the critical role that this bank had in underwriting all the parts of the New Deal and also getting us ready, prepped up and ready for World War II. So that made those two things successful. I just wanted to point out that there are a few other proposals in Congress for infrastructure financing authorities. This is our proposal right here, HR 3339, and it is unique compared to the others. The second column right here is the infrastructure financing authority that was briefly part of the bipartisan bill, but was dropped out of it. And there's some other proposals as well. The way that our bank distinguishes itself from the others is, first of all, it's large enough at $5 trillion to cover all of the infrastructure financing gap, in addition to build new mega projects that we need across the country. These others are only orders of magnitude much too small to cover everything. The second big difference is this bill does not request any monies from Congress to get the bank started. It is budget neutral. It does not require new spending or taxes or deficit spending or anything like that. The others all require appropriations in the billions. If we can't finance infrastructure, then we would have difficulty financing these startup monies as well. And then finally, it does not require public-private partnerships like a couple of these proposals do. This is a little schematic on how the bank works, and in particular how it's capitalized. We use the same technique as Alexander Hamilton, go to the private sector and ask would they like to sell in about $500 billion worth of their treasury holdings in exchange for an equivalent preferred stock in the NIB. And the preferred stock would pay them an extra 2% above what they're earning on the treasuries. That's the enticement for them to bring it in. And that extra 2% stream would actually come out of the interest earnings from the loans. This is the whole flow chart right here of how the bank works. This is the capitalization part I just described. Then the bank is ready to give out loans. And this process works just like a commercial bank. This NIB will take in deposits, can issue its own bonds to get cash. But the most important mechanism that provides the financing for the loans is just like a commercial bank. It can create its own money on the fly, and it does it as part of its accounting procedures. So whenever anybody comes in for a loan, it puts the loan up on the asset side of its books, creates a deposit on the liability side of its books of the same size. And whenever you create a deposit like that, you're actually creating money. And then it will use flows from the banking system into the NIB from the deposits and bond issues in order to cash the checks, to actually spend the money on these loans that may pass out into the rest of the banking system. This is the repayment process right here, principal and interest. This bank will charge around the Treasury bond rate for its loans. That will be the lowest cost financing around available. It'll be very competitive with municipal bond rates, and will keep borrowing costs down for the borrowers. The borrowers would be state and local governments, anybody that owns public infrastructure, including a transportation authority, water utility, a state, a county, city government, any of those entities can borrow from the bank, and that'll spread the borrowing burden across different balance sheets. And we can even start new transit authorities or something like that to lend into. What we know is for every dollar that these entities would borrow for an infrastructure project, that will plow back around $3 to $7 back into the economy. This particular bank will pay all the projects will pay family sustaining wages, Buy America Only. The direct spending and the respending from these projects, spending $5 trillion on infrastructure projects over 10 years, will really boost the American economy. And that will raise growth rates way up here compared to where they have been way down here. And with higher growth rates, then you have much more tax receipts coming into the federal budget and into state and local budgets as well to repay back the loans. This is what the bank will cover. As I said, $5 trillion for different kinds of hard infrastructure projects. The first part of this number we got from the American Society of Civil Engineers, who say that after you account for all of the spending on infrastructure out of the federal budget and out of state and local budgets, we still have a $2.6 trillion gap over the next 10 years for that we need to repair transportation systems, 1.2 trillion, water systems, 1.1 trillion, and to upgrade the power grid as well. We need to also build cybersecurity on here and expand the transmission capacity of the grid to bring on things like electric cars. There's a backlog of renewable projects that can't come on right now. And then in addition, we've added categories of our own, which we think are very important in the transportation area. 1.1 trillion we've costed out and dedicated for a national high-speed rail network across the country. Also, we need, of course, broadband everywhere. We need affordable housing. We need to link it up with transportation systems to get folks back and forth to work efficiently. And then we need some large water scale projects down in the Southwest. We have huge droughts down there, and that's where we grow a lot of our food. This is the same concept right here, but I've just lined it up with the actual numbers. This is the $5 trillion overall. The funding gap that the engineers measure at 2.6 trillion and the extra projects. And then I lined up the new bipartisan plan with its proposal of $550 billion of new money for different systems. And what you can see is that even if this bill ends up passing, and we want it to pass because we want as much grant money coming into states and locals first before they take even low-cost interest loans, this money will just simply not be enough. Our overall new funding gap for bridges and roads is nearly 800 billion, and this only provides 110 billion. The same is true for transit systems. Passenger rail will give a little bit more money to Amtrak, but that will not build out new rail systems, which the engineers are not counting and factoring in. And we need new regular passenger rail systems. And then, of course, we need the high-speed rail that we factored in down here. And then there won't be enough for any of the others. And all this infrastructure competes with each other. So we need to have much more brought in for water systems, for example. We need to replace all along the East Coast. Many of you know that we have leaking stormwater overflows that are spilling dirty water into our water systems. We need to replace all of the lead line pipes that are underneath the roads. So the engineers are saying we need at least 1.1 trillion for that, and very little is provided by this plan. So the idea here is this bank will top up whatever Congress manages under the baseline spending for transportation and under the new money for transportation. This bank will top it all up and provide enough to finance everything. I think our biggest difficulties that we're not addressing in the transportation area is traffic congestion. Here are the 10 most congested cities in America. Half of them are along the East Coast. The other half are along the West Coast. And we're losing a lot of CO2 emissions, wasting fuel. This is impacting the economy. And we need to have a basic overall plan to solve our traffic congestion problems. So to do that, this NIB plan wants to put more rail into the transportation mix and will fully fund everything. It'll still continue to fund the roads, so there won't be one or the other. And we've dedicated, as I said, $1 trillion just for earmark for high-speed rail to relieve traffic congestion on roads and at airports and better connect Americans to get to their jobs and back home again. We will provide more for passenger and freight rail and try to, there's a lot of rail in the United States that's going unused. And we really need to address making a better use of that for passenger and freight rail. And this will have big energy and economy savings for the economy. What we know is if we move passengers by freight and rail rather than road and car, we can save 2/3 on fuel costs and CO2 emissions. This will also keep America much more competitive than it is where everybody else in the world has high-speed rail and we don't. Then the other thing that we really want to address, which is not in your bailiwick, but it impacts transportation systems, is fixing the lead lines in the drinking water systems. We have a lot of these lead lines in the Northeast, in the Midwest. Let's just go down these cities. I know many of you are from these cities, Providence, Rhode Island, Baltimore, Maryland, not just Newark, New Jersey, but all of northern New Jersey, Massachusetts. And we need to get these lead lines from underneath the roads before we fix the roads on top. The money for that in the bipartisan plan is way too small. It's only $15 billion. We estimate that the need could be anywhere from $60 billion up to $150 billion, up to $286 billion, which is the implicit amount in the American Failure to Act report. So one of the things that will make more efficient here in this construction process is we'll be fixing all the utilities underneath the roads, bundling projects so that we can fix them underneath the roads before we fix the roads on top. Because I know there's this discussion and debate. Should we maintain roads or should we build new roads? We want to, of course, do both of those. But before we do that, we want to fix all these utilities under the roads so that we're digging it up only once and saving construction costs in that way. So I think that's, and then I think really we're pretty absolutely sure that states can repay all of these loans out of the interest earnings from the loans. So I'll stop right there and see if anybody has any questions for me from the presentation.
Alphecca, I have a question, and it's based on what you just finished saying. How states repay the loans? Could you go over that again?
Sure. So, like I said, I'm a macroeconomist, and what I always look at is the effect of any kind of proposal on the economy. And what we've seen is that we've had a big. You can see implicitly how things affect the economy just intuitively. For example, we've had stimulus bills, 3 stimulus bills that have really made sure that our recovery out of the COVID pandemic was a V shape like this. So we came out quickly out of the recovery. In fact, we may even be overheating a little bit right now. We have a little bit of inflation. So you can see that the effect of a stimulus on the economy, and then the effect of that recovery, that economic recovery has had on your tax receipts, on your local tax receipts. The same thing will be in operation today. Not only will this NIB provide the most low-cost loans at Treasury rates, when you're taking a 30-year loan at a Treasury rate of maybe 2.5% over 30 years, this is less than inflation right now. So you're essentially getting a no-cost loan, and then you're mortgaging your road or your bridge over a really long period of time. And there'll be simple loan applications here. It'll be very flexible what loans you request for your projects and whether you want to bundle them together like this to save costs. There'll be some grant money available too. But the big process by which you're able to repay these loans is in the stimulus to the economy from spending $5 trillion. And we expect that it'll get American growth rates up to an average of 5% over the foreseeable future. And just to compare growth rates right here, since that's my sort of thing that I look at first and foremost, we've had, as I said, a big stimulus from the stimulus bills. We're going to have maybe 6% growth this year, maybe 3% growth next year. But as the stimulus wears off, the growth rate will go back down to below what we've had as an average over the last 10 years before COVID, down to 1.1%. So your finances are going to be impacted by wearing off of the stimulus over time. But if we can spend $5 trillion over 10 years, and have a big push into the productivity of the economy, we can get our growth rate up at 5%. You will capture, state and locals will capture 9% of that money, of every new dollar that's created. And then you'll be able, with your user fees, to repay back the loans. That's the sort of the loop.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions for Alphecca?
Alphecca, the second slide you put up showed 4 presidents. So
Right.
what is this president's take on this proposal, since essentially it would be his proposal?
Right. So at some point, I understand where President Biden has come from and his rollout of stimulus measures first to repair the economy from COVID, and then dealing with infrastructure second, and then also the American Jobs Plan. I understand all of that. And he wants to do this through the budget. And the bottom line is that at the end of the day, as I've shown on the slide from the engineers, we simply won't have enough money to cover everything. This is the plan that he was able to negotiate with. As the previous speaker said, it got smaller and smaller over time because of the difficulty in agreeing to how to pay for infrastructure. That's been the real bottleneck. The Republicans don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to have deficit spending. And so as a result, even to finance this plan, we have some novel, to say the least, but this plan will jack up the debt level. And I've also looked at the debt level into the future. You may be quite shocked to know that this year we're paying about $300 billion on interest on the federal debt. By year 10, under the Sanders long-term budget proposal, we'll be paying over $1 trillion on interest on the debt. So really, the debt level does matter. The beauty of this bank is that we can finance all of our nation's infrastructure needs and fundamentally restructure the American economy without adding any interest on the debt or adding anything to the debt level. Now, at some point in time, we've had many contacts with the Biden plan, with the Biden administration, through the Department of Energy, through the Department of Commerce, and into the Biden transition team to let them know about this proposal. But at some point in time, we'll need many more folks. We have a big, huge grassroots level, and many legislators like Senator DePalma, who are in caucuses. State of Pennsylvania, for example, has a caucus to ask their members of Congress to support this bank. So we're at a level where we're trying to raise awareness to get the administration to sign on to this idea of a big, bold bank. This is a New Deal type proposal to restructure the American economy and build all of our nation's infrastructure, fix our traffic congestion problems all at once. And so it's a process for us to make them aware that what they've done so far is great, and we want them to do this, but it simply isn't going to be enough to solve our transportation problems.
Thank you. I think we have one more question. You could, yes, go ahead, unmute.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. It's Carlos Leitao. I'm from the Quebec legislature. One question, I know things in Canada are of course done differently than in the United States, but here in Canada, we have the Federal Infrastructure Bank of Canada, the IBC. This thing was created back in late 2017, early 2018. Now here we are 3 years later, and the bank has had trouble getting fully staffed, getting fully funded, and it's really not operating well yet. So my question to you is, assuming that the Federal Investment Bank in the US does go ahead, do you think that you could face the same kind of hurdles in terms of staffing and having the bank up and running once it's approved by Congress, or like in Canada, it just stays a very marginal player for this lack of resources?
I'm really sorry to hear that the Bank of Canada is not operating too well. That will be a bit of an exception, because there are infrastructure banks all around the world that are operating very well. The Europeans have the European Investment Bank, which is multilateral and lends for infrastructure projects all across that continent. Since UK is Brexiting, they're trying to build their own infrastructure bank. Chinese have 2 of them. And they're modeled on this bank right here. And they, of course, have built phenomenally. They built 27,000 miles of high-speed rail in 10 years. financed by those banks. The Japanese have one, use it for their high-speed rail, and the Australians as well. So there are provisions in our bill for emergency procedures to relax the normal requirements of the bank to get started right away. We get a little bit of money from the budget to hire people so that we're not, cash strapped. And then we'll pay that back to the budget later. And we are also targeting the projects that we want to start off with right away, because some of these will be complicated, requiring a lot of engineering, like the Gateway project, which we want this bank to fully finance, by the way. So the projects that we think that we could start with right away are all the ones in your file cabinets, full file drawers full of projects that have not been able to be financed so far, especially road projects and water projects. Start with the lead line pipes and then fix the roads on top. And we have all the bridges that are identified as structurally deficient, start with those right away. And by having this list of things to start with right away, and even on a thin, workforce, we'll expand and grow as we go. So we want to get started rolling in the first year of operations.
Thank you. Just one, if I may, just a very quick second point. You mentioned in your presentation that this bank would follow the provisions of the Buy American Act, if I understood correctly. Of course, for us here in Canada, that's a little, we worry a little bit when we hear that. Would there be provisions to give, I would say, preferential or somewhat differential treatment to Canadian suppliers?
So I know that there's been this competition, for example, for Canadian steel.
Which is US, which is
Yeah.
US owned. US Steel owns the Canadian steel industry, but anyway, that's
right.
That's
most of our steel competition actually comes from the fact that we're importing a lot of steel, dumped steel from China at below market prices, and we don't see why we should be buying low cost, dumped steel like that when we can beef up our American steel plants. Also, the same goes for cement. Those are the two big inputs, I think, into the construction. And then all the rail cars, those kinds of things. We need to stimulate American manufacturing, bring it back. It's decimated our economy, and that's made a big hole in our economy. And so Buy America is one of the provisions that is required for all federal funding. We're supposed to be buying all American provisions, but slowly the exceptions have creeped in over time. So it is a big objective of this bank to stimulate American manufacturing and bring it back on shore. But I still think that there'll be lots of use for Canadian steel and Canadian products going into all of the secondary growth in the economy that will come out of this spending. There'll be enough in here for everybody. It'll be a lot of work and a lot of construction.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat, I think we're right on time.
Perfect. No further questions from anyone? One quick one.
Yeah, I do have one. If your group is interested in hearing continuations of the discussion, our group is growing, and our local support. We've been endorsed, for example, by the National Association of Counties, considered by the cities. We have proposals in resolutions in 21 state legislatures to support this bank. So if any of you would like to receive further information about this and want to get on the email list for our group, you can put your name in the chat, and then I'll scoop up the email lists and send them on to our folks to keep you connected with our group.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That was a great presentation and a very exciting topic. So we're going to move on to something we've been doing for a few years with great success, where we have about a half an hour, 35 minutes to share ideas What we'll do here is we'll go state by state. I think we have time for 2 to 3 minutes per state. I'd encourage you to give a brief update of what you're doing in your state or provinces to address transportation infrastructure needs and your wants, and what you are thinking of doing with federal dollars to remedy the situations you have. I'll start off the discussion with what we're doing in Vermont. And we have our transportation chair here from Vermont, Representative Lanfear. And I'm sure if I missed something, I would ask her to jump in and correct me. First of all, I think we're going to find some of the usual suspects as far as what we're up against state by state. Obviously, paving is a big issue with us in Vermont. This year, we have an increase of $20 million over 2020, and deficient bridges, structurally deficient bridges, continues to be an issue. We've come a long way in bringing back our bridges in Vermont. We were at one time, I can't even throw out the percentage, but it was one of the poorest in the country as far as condition of bridges. So this year we're addressing again, and thankfully that issue. One of our big ticket items this year is a $45 million upgrade in our DMV IT system, something we have tried and actually failed at in the past with another system, and this is sorely needed. We are running on an antiquated system we have been for years. So this is exciting. Another big issue with us in Vermont, the EV electrification. We're going all the way through, including public transit. We're investing heavily in EV charging stations infrastructure across the state. That's a huge issue here in Vermont, and we are investing heavily in that, as I said, several $million. We continue to fund upgrades to our rail system. Expanding passenger rail has been and is now an initiative to continue service, to expand it, actually, not continue, to Burlington from Rutland, which we haven't had in years. And again, we work on the Montreal connection south. That's something we've been working on for a long time and continue to do so. Public transportation is being expanded across Vermont. We have fare free rides funded with CRF dollars. And we are actually participating in a pilot project to electrify certain portions of the transit routes. So those are some of the issues we're working on here in Vermont. And I think we'll find that some of the states are experiencing the same issues. And what I'll do, how I'll handle this is I'll run down the list. If you're here and wish to speak to your state, we'll give you 2 to 3 minutes for a brief introduction and see what's happening. We'll start with Connecticut. If there's anybody here from Connecticut that would like to speak.
Hi, Patrick. It's Roland Lamar, House Chair in Connecticut of Transportation.
Hi, Roland. How are you?
I'm doing well. We are doing pretty much the same stuff. We've utilized our federal funding largely to help support a public transportation system, particularly our rail system, into and out of New York City. As you might imagine, COVID really decimated our ridership levels and the support that we received from ticket sales for the most heavily trafficked passenger rail line in the country. And we struggled with what would happen if we started to roll back service when people start to return to work. Would they avail themselves of the rail line if it was depreciated service? So we wanted to sustain operations largely for our first responders and people, our healthcare workers who are commuting via train. But we were able to take advantage decreased in ridership to do a lot of the track work that was necessary to improve travel speeds. We have a series of movable bridges along the rail line that cost in excess of $1 billion a piece. They're over 100 years old. So we're using a lot of our federal funding to address repairs and necessary upgrades to that infrastructure. Similarly, we've used the time to expand public transit operations and upgrades that needed to be made along throughout Connecticut, along our branch lines. We've invested in a lot of our backlog as well of deficient bridges. We similarly have over, I think, 250 deficient bridges that we've begun to address. Modernization of our DMV, ensuring that no one has to actually physically walk into a DMV anymore. As we've talked about this in this committee in the past, we're all doing this in every state, how to make DMV operations a little bit more consumer friendly. That has taken a lot of money to upgrade our systems and make that more of a back office experience rather than a front facing need to walk into the building experience. We reformed our P3 legislation that will allow us to be a little bit more creative in what we do and how we bundle some of the projects as we move forward, anticipating federal funds. We think we'll get better cost savings out of that. We added an Office of Innovative Financing in Connecticut that really will upgrade how we finance a lot of our projects and the types of considerations we use. Connecticut has a lot of assets that we've never really taken advantage of when it comes to potential financing options, whether it's through the laying of cable along our transit assets or using the DOT right-of-ways. And we believe that there's opportunities there. We're going to do our EV build-outs across the entire state. The benefit of being a small state is that it's not particularly hard to envision what it would mean to have a robust EV build-out in Connecticut. And in our transportation expenditures, we've started to build out a community connectivity program, which would allow, we're starting off with a 2-year program of $15 million a year just to do sidewalks and pedestrian enhancements in a lot of our urban and high pedestrian volume areas, just really improving walkability of a lot of our communities. We, like all of you, are seeing a dramatic increase in pedestrian fatalities, car fatalities, and we focused a great deal on safety legislation this past year. It culminated in a comprehensive pedestrian safety bill that we passed as well. And I think that about covers it here in Connecticut.
Thank you very much. How about Delaware? No one from Delaware. How about Maine? Maryland? Massachusetts? New Brunswick? New Hampshire?
Oh, I appropriately pulled over to the side of the road.
Perfect.
I'm Senator David Waters, Vice Chair of Transportation in the New Hampshire State Senate. And most of our focus on transportation funding is when we have a 10-year highway plan, and that's done in the off-budget years. So we're just starting that process for next year's session, and a lot of discussion about how to use the federal money. We are likely to put most of it into red listed bridges and highways. We are spending some engineering funds on extending commuter rail up from Massachusetts to Manchester, and it's hoped that the federal funding will let us actually do that project. We are struggling mightily with EV funding because of COVID and other kinds of issues. We've been unable to get the Volkswagen money out, although I think we've broken the logjam on that. We'll be doing that over the next several months. But I am wondering, and maybe other legislators have some thoughts about what to do in terms of how to spend the federal money that's going to be coming in on EV infrastructure. I've been thinking maybe we need to set up a trust or some kind of public-private partnership rather than just dumping it into the Department of Transportation. We are facing a lot of issues about climate resilience, repeated flooding and washing out roads in parts of the state. And then increasingly along the coast, there are issues about groundwater rising because of sea level rising that's pushing into up to 5 miles inland. We're seeing road surfaces starting to be impacted by the rising water table due to sea level rise. So I've been really in some ways just waiting to see what kind of flexibility the states will have under the federal funding. We do need to just supporting operations. That's been a real issue with the decline of the gas tax revenues over the last year because of COVID and other factors as well. So I think that pretty, in terms of ZEV adoption, we're in a political situation where that's very, very difficult right now. But the auto dealers and everybody else starting to clamor for us to get moving on those things as well. But that is really something less about funding than it is a political issue that we're facing these days in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you, David. New Jersey. Is anyone from New Jersey? How about New York? Nova Scotia. Ontario. Pennsylvania.
I can provide an update if you like.
We'd
I'm
love
not
it.
a state senator or representative, but my boss is the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee.
Thank you very much, Nolan. I appreciate it.
Great. Very briefly, good morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to provide a very quick update on the status of transportation funding in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, he had a commission that was created. It was the Transportation Revenue Options Commission. That commission was including almost 50 different individuals from diverse transportation backgrounds. They produced a report recently and estimate the needs for highways and bridges that are owned by PennDOT are to the tune of $8 billion, plus another $1 billion in unmet needs for our multimodal transportation system. We are still reviewing the reports and the various options that were included in it. And at the same time, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation is also proceeding with tolling at least 9 bridges on the interstate system as a result of reduced revenue. And my boss, Senator Wayne Langerholtz, who is the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, he was appointed to the committee in January. And what he came out with on June 2nd is called the Drive Smart Act. It's an acronym meaning delivering reforms and investments for vehicle efficiency and supporting motor carriers, airports, rails and trails, and transit agencies. And what the Drive Smart Act is, it's a multimodal initiative encompassing various reforms and investment measures. Some of the bolder ideas include creating a mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles, as well as leaning on the federal government's Garvey bonding program to fund those 9 bridges rather than having PennDOT toll them. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Nolan? Okay, moving right along, Prince Edward Island. Puerto Rico.
Hi, good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
I'm William Villafañe, Senator at Large here in Puerto Rico. Right now, we're dealing mainly with the reconstruction for the damages caused by Hurricane Maria and the earthquake that we had last year, last year, previously to the pandemic. And most of our infrastructure, including roads, the power grid, dams, our water resources, and schools, and most of our infrastructure is very, very damaged. And we have been we appropriated with billions of federal money to rebuild most of that infrastructure. Right now, as the Senate, we are watching and giving guidance to the state government for that rebuild process. And we are working with the Department of Transportation of Puerto Rico to see if we can do it quicker, because as you know, Hurricane Maria was 4 years ago, and most of the damages haven't been worked yet. So we are working with that here in the Senate of Puerto Rico.
Thank you very much. Quebec.
Thank you. We do things a little differently than in the United States, and the Canadian provinces have a lot more autonomy, fiscal autonomy, than the US states, and we protect our sovereignty, our jurisdiction fiercely. That's perhaps one of the reasons I wasn't too generous with the federal infrastructure bank, because one of the problems they have is that we, the provinces, we like their money, but we don't like their ideas. We want to be the ones to decide where to put the money. So that's one of the issues there. In Quebec, we have a public infrastructure program of about $135 billion over 10 years. To put that in perspective, that's about 25% of GDP. That's huge. Half of that, nearly half of that, goes into transportation. And within transportation, there's the usual stuff, roads, bridges, etc. But there's also a great deal of emphasis on public transit and on the electrification of transportation. So that's where most of the money is being spent, where most of the effort is concentrated. There are very large public transit projects underway and planned in Quebec City and Montreal. The one thing that we have that is quite unique, and I may have spoken about this before with you, is that our public sector pension fund, CDPQ, which in the world of asset managers is actually quite a large pension fund manager. CDPQ has created a infrastructure division, CDPQ infrastructure, and they are investing directly in public transit projects. So not only do they fund it with some contribution from the government, but is funded by CDPQ and managed by them and owned by them. So they will continue to manage these public transit projects, mainly in the Montreal area. These are huge projects. There's one currently underway, a light rail project going underway. It's a $7 to $8 billion project, and there are others on the drawing board. So this may be maybe an idea. I don't know how you are set up, but public asset managers jumping into the public infrastructure field. This required some legislative changes which were made to make sure that they're able to do this. It's a new kind of PPP. We call it a public-public partnership because the asset manager is also a public organization, and it appears to be working very well. It was started out in 2016, 17, when we were in government. The government has changed in 2018, but the process continues. So this enjoys broad public support and political support.
Towards testing driverless, highly automated.
Okay. Okay, so I'll close briefly. Within the transportation realm, what we are also, it's not just public transit, but also a great deal of emphasis on electrification. So, you know, EVs, charging stations, etc. There's a great push to do that. Another peculiar thing we have in Quebec, which may be of interest to you, is we have something that we call the Green Fund. The Green Fund exists, is real. There's real money in there. It comes from the carbon market that we have with California. We would very much like other Canadian and US partners to join in this carbon market. But this does generate funding, and the Green Fund has now about $1 billion, or $1.5 billion, and it is also moving rapidly into promoting and funding the electrification of transportation. So I'll leave it here, and we can discuss it further if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more left here. Rhode Island. Anyone from Rhode Island? How about the U.S. Virgin Islands? I think that runs the gamut. Anybody that hasn't had a chance to speak want to talk on any subject? We've got, how are we doing on time, Don? No, 4-5 minutes left?
Yes, that's it.
That's it. Anybody else? Well, great. That's pretty good time. That gives me a few minutes to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. This was a very interesting topic. National Infrastructure Bank is an exciting proposal. I look forward to hearing more about that in the future. And I'd like to also thank our speakers, Tanya, Snyder, and also Alphecca Muttardy. They did a great job presenting today, and very informative. I think there's a common theme here among us, and we have infrastructure needs that are, let's say, they're pretty much in line state to state. We all have the same issues. We all have a structural deficiency in our bridge systems. We all have paving needs. We all have aging culverts, aging water lines, and I look forward to working together with everyone in the future to remedy some of these situations, and hope that we see some of the ideas that were discussed today come to fruition. With that, I will say so long to everyone, unless there's anything I missed, Don or Steve. Have anything else?
No, thank you very much. I just wanted to make a quick statement. You know, I think that we need a moment of silence for the U.S. term Infrastructure Week. Hopefully, what we're going to be looking at is the infrastructure decade coming up. And, you know, as our speakers have said, the legislation that is pending, passed in the Senate, hopefully passes in the House and signed by the president, will make it infrastructure investments very important. And as Senator Waters said, one of the things that they're interested in seeing is what is the flexibility of this new legislation. And I can promise you that Steve and I are going to make sure that we're on top of that as soon as this passes. And we've been tracking this also in order to get that information out to everyone, because I know, as we heard from Pennsylvania, there's a lot of alternatives. One should be, how can we spend the money that will be coming into the state? So I just wanted to make that plug.
And let me just add to that, one of our ways of communication is our newsletter updates that we put out a couple times a month, or whenever there's a hot issue, we try to put them out. So it can be 3 times a month sometimes, but if you're not on our email list to get a newsletter updates, just contact us. And we'll put you on the list because it is a good form of communication. We try to keep everybody updated on what's happening around the CSG region and certainly nationally as well. That's it for me.
Great. Well, with that, we'll say so long, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Much appreciated. We'll see you in person next time.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye now.